can make your own bright future, Tom Trails.
It was a Monday morning. 2 weeks had passed since Tom had gone through the ordeal of being accused of shooting Sam Preston. Sam was recovering well and was expected back at school the next week. As the students came into seminary, there seemed to be only one subject of conversation.
I still feel sick about that game. It seemed like we were winning, and then all of a sudden, just at the end, they got ahead of us.
They just got hot, and our guys cooled off. I bet if we played them again, we'd beat them 20 points.
Sounds like we're all in mourning. That was a tough one to lose, wasn't it? Well, I think it was pretty plain. The tide of battle changed when team captain Bill Bronson got 5 fouls on him and had to leave the game. After he left, the team sort of fell apart. The same thing would happen if Keith didn't come to seminary. We wouldn't know how to get started.
Yeah, you'd all be like a herd of lost sheep without me.
He's just joking, but he is a real leader. I'm glad he's the president of the class. It's great to have someone like him to look up to.
Now that we've had our devotional, I don't like to remind you again of that heartbreaking game, but I think we can illustrate an important idea by talking about the game. I know Rollins, who coaches Royville's team. I'm sure that right from the first he was determined to have his players work on Bill Bronson and to get him to foul them. He knew that if our team lost Bronson, we would have a struggle to stay in the game. His strategy finally paid off, and you saw what happened. With our leader gone, our lead faded away like an ice cube in the sun. Now, what does all this have to do with our lesson for today? There's a more important contest going on than last Friday's game. Who can tell me what it is?
The contest to do well in school.
Well, that's part of it, but it's even bigger than that.
Do you mean the contest of life?
Yes, that's what I mean. Now, Tom, tell us how life is a contest.
Well, I guess because we're here in this life to see how we'll do.
That's right. In a way, there are 2 teams. One team, led by Satan, is trying to help evil win, and the other team, led by Jesus, is trying to help goodness win. Remember how our basketball team lost its punch when we lost our star player? Do you suppose Satan would like to do that to the righteous team? Would he like to have our leader leave the game?
Do you mean Jesus?
Yes, I do mean Jesus. Did Satan ever try to get Jesus out of the great game or contest of life? Well, if you're not sure whether he did or not, let's turn to Matthew chapter 4, verse 1. What we are about to read took place shortly after the baptism of Jesus. Lily, will you read verses 1 to 3, please?
Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread.
Jesus must have been physically very hungry. Satan wanted Jesus to have a desire to prove that God had not forgotten him. At the same time, he hoped Jesus would want food more than he wanted to do the right thing. But Jesus wouldn't let his physical desires rule his soul. What was his answer? Tom, will you please read the next verse?
But he answered and said, It is written, that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God.
This illustrates how Satan tried to get our leader, Jesus, to follow his physical passions or appetites, and to satisfy them even if it meant sinning to do so. Can any of you think of the way Satan uses this temptation on us?
Some people get drunk so they'll feel good.
After a person smokes for a while, he gets used to it and he can't quit.
I think that's what happens to a lot of kids when they're making out.
You're right, Sarah. I suppose Satan works through our physical passions in this way, more than any other way. He gets young men and women to do a little necking and petting, because he knows that this will cause them to go even further into immorality. Well, anyway, Satan couldn't get Jesus out of the game with that kind of temptation, and so he tried another way. Sarah, read verses 5 and 6, please.
Then the devil taketh him up into the holy city, and setteth him on a pinnacle of the temple. If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down, for it is written, He shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone.
Satan tempted Jesus to jump from a high place and to have angels keep him from being hurt. If Jesus did this, he would be famous. How many of you would like to be a famous movie actor or a famous athlete? If you had a chance to be famous, but to do so you would have to quit being LDS, how many of you would do it? The temptation to be famous or popular is a strong one. Sometimes kids do foolish things just because they want to be popular or famous. Some girls might sacrifice their virtue just for the sake of pleasing a boy and try to make herself popular with him. Of course, it usually ends up just the opposite, and he soon dislikes her instead of liking her. But anyway, fame was offered to Jesus. What was his answer? Let's read verse 7. Will you read it for us, John?
Jesus said unto him, It is written again, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God.
So Satan failed again in his efforts to remove Jesus from the game. But he had one more great temptation to try. Let's see what it was. Lily, read verses 8 and 9.
Again the devil taketh him up into an exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all of the kingdoms of the world, and the glory of them, and saith unto him, All these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me.
Satan offered to make Jesus ruler over all the people of the earth. In other words, he offered Jesus what?
He offered Jesus power.
That's right, Keith. We all like to feel power. We like to feel what we say counts. We like to feel that we are leaders, don't we? But Jesus would not give in to temptation. Shirley, read verses 10 and 11, please.
Then saith Jesus unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him.
So we see, Jesus, our leader, is still in the game of life. He is still leading us to do good and to avoid evil. So now Satan is focusing on other players who are on the side of good. Who do you suppose I mean?
Do you mean us?
That's right. I do mean us. He'll tempt us in every way he can. If he can't get us to follow his temptations one way, he'll try another. He'll attack us in the areas where we are the weakest.
On the bus going to school, Tom and Keith sat together.
Keith, you sure have meant a lot to me. I've always felt like I could look up to you. It seems to me that you've lived like the way you should all the time. The way Jesus didn't fall for those temptations. Well, it sort of reminded me of you.
I'm not perfect, but I've never had much trouble doing what was right. Guess I've been kind of lucky that way. Hey, you know, I sure have gotten interested in biology. I think Mr. Lewis is the greatest teacher I ever had. How do you like him?
He's all right. He's a good man in some ways, but there's something about him that kind of bothers me.
Oh, not me. I think he's the greatest man I know.
Tom was a little surprised at Keith's words. He thought he wouldn't rate Mr. Lewis as being as great as other men he knew. That day in biology, Tom decided to try to see why Keith was so impressed with Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis dressed in sharp clothes. His speaking voice was deep and his sense of humor was excellent. He had a way of seeming very sure that whatever his opinion was, it was the right one.
So we see life began as a one-celled animal, and through evolution has become advanced to the condition we now call man.
Mr. Lewis spent the remainder of the period talking about evolution. The next night at MIA, Tom was talking with Elder Tyson.
How's school coming, Tom?
It's coming better than it used to be, except for biology.
What's wrong? Biology is a good subject.
Well, I'm not sure about Mr. Lewis, the teacher. Keith thinks he's the greatest man in the world, but I don't think so.
Why? What do you think is wrong with him?
Well, he's telling us all this stuff about us coming from monkeys.
You mean evolution?
Yeah, that's what he calls it.
A lot of people believe like he does, Tom. They figure they have to explain everything scientifically. Many of them won't believe anything they can't see.
Do they believe in God? They can't see him.
A lot of them don't. They sort of feel like we who do believe in God are kind of childish or uninformed.
The next day, Mr. Lewis continued his discussion of evolution.
Yes, Tom.
Mr. Lewis, I kind of feel like some of the things you're talking about aren't true.
Oh, is that right? Just what did I say that you can't accept?
Well, I believe there is a God and that we are his children. I don't believe man came from a little bug in the ocean or something like that. I believe we're children of God.
You said that very well, Tom. I surely don't want to destroy your faith. However, there will come a day when you get a little older and have had time to think it over and study it. You might change your mind.
Not me.
That's what the people who thought the world was flat said.
It seems to me that Tom ought to read chapter 13 over again. It makes the evolution case the only logical one.
Excellent idea. Now, I advise all of you to read that chapter again. Then tomorrow, perhaps Keith, you could give a report on it. You know, I get the feeling that you understand these things almost as well as I do.
I'm really excited. Mr. Lewis told me he thought he could help me get a scholarship at a university.
You seem to go right along with him on that stuff he was teaching today.
Sure, I do. You can't argue with science. But don't worry, I still have my faith just like you do. Anyway, religion and science go right together.
They don't go together in evolution.
Well, usually they do. Someday religion will see how evolution is right, and then they'll get together again. Science has really added to my faith. It makes me feel secure to know the reason for everything. Say, Tom, could you tell the elders I won't be able to help them anymore this week? I got to study a little more than I have been.
In the days that followed, Keith seemed to change. Tom and the others were saddened when Keith started missing seminary. The class carried on, but things didn't seem the same without Keith. It was quite a day at school the day Sam Preston came back. Sam was a popular guy in a way, and it had seemed a little lonely at school without him. Sam was in biology class with Tom, Keith, and the others. Since the day Tom made his comment about religion, Mr. Lewis seemed to cleverly use every opportunity he could to try to discourage the students from believing in God. Keith supported Mr. Lewis in what he said. As a matter of fact, he often tried to get Mr. Lewis to discuss religion by asking leading questions.
Mr. Lewis, how can anyone really prove there is a God?
Well, I'm afraid I'm not qualified to answer that. But it seems to me that those who do believe that God is real do so because of an inward feeling. I'm sure they really couldn't prove it. All right, what about it? Can some of you who believe in God prove that he exists?
Tom was about to speak when he heard Sam Preston's voice.
I can prove it. The reason why I know God is real is because I'm here. My mom told me the doctors said I was going to die, and there was no hope for me. And then she told me about how these two men came in the room. She said they laid their hands on my head and blessed me. She said she could see a sort of a light in the room. When they finished, she said she knew I'd live. Well, I did live, and I'm here. And God's real. Don't ever doubt that. He's real, all right. I know that.
Somehow, all of Mr. Lewis's subtle arguments about God not existing seemed like little pebbles when compared with the huge boulder of faith created by Sam's words. Tom's heart had been deeply touched. Never had he been more sure of the reality of God. Keith had asked his question almost mockingly and in an effort to gain attention. Now he had received an answer from a source he did not expect. In his heart, he knew that Sam's words were true. Mr. Lewis also was affected by Sam's response.
Well, Sam, I've got to admit that's about the most convincing proof I've ever heard.
The next morning, Keith was back in seminary. As part of the devotional, he asked the class to forgive him.
It's like Brother Adams told us a while back. Satan got to me through one of my weaknesses. He made me feel I was sort of famous and more important than anyone else. He made me feel I was real smart and didn't need to have faith anymore. Well, I finally woke up. Last night I prayed for the first time in a long time. I know God heard me. I know He lives.
Tom sat quietly looking at Keith. It was good to be able to look up at him again.